Frid och välkomna till dagens uppdatering. Nu har jag varit ute och gått och fått frisk luft. Älvor ville att jag skulle nämna för er att jag har en sjukdom som heter Meniers sjukdom. Som gör att man blir väldigt trött. Det innebär att jag kan bara sitta någon timme ibland framför datorn här, så får jag gå och lägga mig och sen upp igen. Men vi kämpar på i Jesu namn. Allt är inte Gud som glimmar, boken vi läser i fortsätter vi. Frälst i hoppet. Vi letar alltså i Bibeln efter mer information om hoppet. Vi kommer då att finna att hoppet handlar om den visshet jag har och fått del av i det rike som Gud har lovat mig, som ska upprättas när Jesus Kristus kommer tillbaka. Det är ett fridsrike, alltså ett rike med shalom, där Guds oförstörbara tillstånd kommer att råda. Där kommer min förnedringskropp som kan bli sjuk att bytas ut mot en härlighetskropp genom den kraft varmed han har makt att underlägga sig allt. Filippe 3, 20-21. Här och nu kan alltså kött och blod inte få Guds rike till arvedel. Första Korinthierbrevet 15 och 50. Det är ingen förnekelse av helandet, men det säger att hälsa och evigt liv inte kan bli en förblivande verklighet i våra kroppar eller själar i den här tiden. I hans sår har vi visserligen blivit helade, och det är ju sant. Första Petrusbrevet 2:24. Och själv har jag ju blivit helad när jag var mindre. Men det står också att Jesus har övervunnit dödens makt. Andra Timoteusbrevet 1:10. Och ändå dör vi. Det är dessutom tänkbart att när Petrus skriver att vi har blivit helade i hans sår, så tänker han på dem som faktiskt har blivit helade. Det är inte säkert att han menar att alla redan äger full hälsa i sin ande, som Kenyon säger. I vilket fall är det fel att säga som Kenyon att vi redan har allt i vår ande, så att vi med vår bekännelse också kan ta ut allt i själ och i kropp. Paulus uttrycker det här med orden: det är i hoppet som ni är frälsta. Ett hopp som man ser förverkligat är inte längre ett hopp. Vem hoppas på det som man redan ser? Men om vi hoppas på det som vi inte ser, då väntar vi på det troget och uthålligt. Romarbrevet 8, 24-25. Modellen är därför den vi möter i Bibeln av Israels barn som vandrar ut ur Egypten på väg till löfteslandet. Vi har gått ut ur världen och vi har gjort det för ett löftes skull. Vi tror på det löftet, vi vandrar i trohet mot löftenas Gud, men vi är inte hemma än. Hur vi än lever i tro så är vi ändå inte framme. I hoppet ser vi fram emot det, som enligt löftet ska bli vårt. Vi gläder oss i tacksamhet och det föder trohet. Men vi är inte framme än, inte ens i vår egen ande, så därför väntar vi uthålligt. Under ökenvandringen skedde ju många mirakel. Dessa hade alla karaktären att Gud höll folket vid liv i en situation där man kanske annars skulle ha dött. Det regnade manna från himlen och det flöt vatten ur klippan. Skorna slits inte ens ut, men öken var det lika fullt. Inga under skedde som en självklarhet. Det var Gud som bestämde när varje under skulle ske. När Mose slog på klippan istället för att tala till dem som Gud hade sagt, så flöt det ändå vatten ur den. Men Gud sa till Mose att han hade brustit i tro, 4 Mosebok 22-12, eftersom han inte hade gjort det Gud hade sagt. Nästa överskrift: en falsk tidsdimension. Kenyon är tidvis mycket anklagande i sina böcker emot den kyrka som har lagt uppfyllelsen av Guds löften enbart till evigheten efter Jesu återkomst. Han menar att detta är snudd på bedrägeri. Med evangelistens hela förmåga att uttrycka sig klatschigt säger han om Guds löfte: It is for now. Det gäller att ta ut nu. Om det inte gäller till fullo fram vi är döda, så menar han att det skulle vara Satan som gjort Guds löfte gällande, eftersom det var han som tar död på oss. Ja. Eller som det också skulle heta: vad ska vi med Guds löfte till när vi ändå kommer till himlen? Det är ju här djävulen finns. Men om det är himlen som är löftet, då har man ju vänt ut och in på hela problemet. Det finns löften även för denna tiden, men det stora löftet har med den kommande riket och tiden att göra. Nu är det lyckligtvis inte djävulen som bestämmer våra dagars mått, utan Gud själv. Och löftet gäller inte främst bara mot djävulen, det är en tanke som gör honom större än han verkligen är. Och det gör den här läran. Djävulen blir faktiskt stor. Ingen hemlängtan. Nästa överskrift. Den stora skaran i himlen, den som ingen kan räkna, består av människor som har kommit ut ur den stora bedrövelsen och just därför tjänar Gud dag och natt. Man kan förstå deras glädje och tacksamhet när man läser om dem. De hade det svårt här på jorden, men hoppet höll dem uppe och nu är de framme i löfteslandet. Lidandena här på jorden har nu fått en mening som många gånger var svårt att se och urskilja medan de pågick. Så är det ju också i våra liv. Vi ser ju ingenting av lycka precis när vi prövas. Det är först efteråt. Kenyon är mycket främmande för tanken att en god Gud kan tillåta lidanden. Eller att något gott egentligen skulle kunna komma ur något lidande. Istället medför trosförkunnelsen en sån överbetoning på nutiden och på friheten från allt lidande att nästan himlen glöms bort. Vi kan uttrycka detta grundläggande fel så här. Kenyon lovar för denna tiden vad Bibeln lovar i himlen och för evigheten. Detta är ett ödesdigert tankesätt på hela den teknik och tro och bekännelse som lärs ut för att vi ska få det som vi anses redan äga här i vår ande. Om bekännelsen får tjäna som en påminnelse om vilken Gud vi tillhör, så kan den ju på många sätt hjälpa oss i trohet och i glädje. Men om den används som en magisk formel för att garantera ett sådant andligt existensminimum, maximum inte minimum, som inte hör hemma i denna tiden, då är risken stor att många blir utbrända och besvikna. Ja, vi har kontakt med många sådana människor faktiskt. Och då till sist blir ju tron en prestation. Somliga kommer att misslyckas med att tro fram, hälsa, pengar, seger, välsignelse. Helt enkelt därför att Kenyon har fel. De kommer då att uppleva det som att de har misslyckats. Men det har de inte gjort. I den här tiden finns det inget som heter att ta ut något i tro. Det är ett uttryck som bygger på Kenyons missuppfattning att allt skulle vara vårt här idag och att Gud skulle vara då som i vår ande. Kenyon har reagerat mot en kyrka som förlagt allt Guds handlande till ett dimmigt och avlägset fjärran. Det gör han rätt i. Guds kraft i den heliga ande finns faktiskt här och nu. Jesus sa till lärjungarna att det inte var någon idé att de gick ut och vittnade om inte andens kraft var över dem. Men andens kraft är bara ett förskott på arvet, inte arvet själv. Romarbrevet 8:23, Efesierbrevet 1:13-14, Andra Korinthierbrevet 1:21-22. Trosförkunnare läser gärna Efesierbrevet 2:6, där det står att Gud har satt oss med Kristus i den himmelska världen. Mindre ofta läses fortsättningen för att han i de kommande tidsåldrarna skulle bevisa oss sin nåds överväldigande rikedom. Ja, det finns mycket kraft här och nu. Men när jag söker den ställs jag inför frågan om jag gör det för min egen räknings skull eller för andras. Själv säger ju Paulus: så utför döden sitt verk i oss, men i er verkar livet. Andra Korinthierbrevet 4:12. Man möter så många trosförkunnare som pekar på sin egen hälsa eller ekonomi för att bevisa att de talar sant. Detta är absolut ingen biblisk tanke, men Gud kan ge dig stor kraft för de sjukas helande, men låta dig själv förbli sjuk. Om du är ödmjuk nog att acceptera det. Jag tänker på predikanten Leif Karlssons bror Rolf Karlsson. Han var ju blind många år och Gud använde honom väldigt starkt här i Sverige. Han har ju skrivit en bok också. Något med mörker, jag kommer inte riktigt ihåg vad den var, men den boken var intressant. Trons nu. Vi såg i början av detta kapitel att trosförkunnare ofta sett hur tacksamt det är att be för sjuka som bär på en speciell övertygelse att de redan fått sitt helande. Den iakttagelsen är säkert riktig. Jag har själv gjort den många gånger. Kenyon tolkar det så här: alla har redan fått ut sitt helande och det gäller bara att stå på det i tro. Men eftersom det inte stämmer med ordet måste vi söka en annan tolkning. Personligen tror jag det fungerar så här att när Gud vill hela så ger han först det mått av tro som behövs för helandet. Gud talar läkedom till en människa och även om kroppen fortfarande verkar så känns helandet som en vilande självklarhet. Ur detta föds sedan också hälsan. När vi ser saken på det här viset då blir tron inte det pris människan måste betala utan tecknet till att Gud har börjat handla. Och så är det en sammanfattning här då av det här kapitlet. När Kenyon talar om tro menar han att vi redan har fått allt som Guds löften utlovar här och nu i den här tiden. Men vi har det i vår ande, säger han, och måste genom vår bekännelse föra ut detta som vår egendom och rättighet till själen och till kroppen då, mot synd och mot sjukdom och till omgivningen, alltså mot Satan och mörkrets makter och allt som han tycks ställa i vår väg. Och allt detta skulle vara mycket enkelt om Kenyon hade rätt på alla punkter. I praktiken ser vi att många misslyckas med att nå målet. Ändå har de förstått budskapet och bekänt som Kenyon lär att man ska göra. Orsaken ligger i att Bibeln klart markerar att vi ännu inte har fått allt. Löftenas fulla uppfyllelse har vi i hoppet. Dem väntar vi på för att få sen vid Jesu återkomst. Eftersom man bygger hela tanken om vad tro på genom en falsk utgångspunkt blir ju också hela läran förvriden. Detta märks tydligast när man ska förklara för dem som misslyckades med att utföra denna lära. Varför gick det som det gjorde? Eftersom det brukar heta att helandet tillhör oss ser man också en annan biverkan av trosförkunnarnas budskap om helande. Det blir ju i praktiken så att var och en kan och bör hålla djävulen själv borta ur sitt liv. Därför kan man bli mött med en sorts du får skylla dig själv när man blir sjuk. Man blir inte alltid så avspisad, ty människor lever ibland med en större barmhärtighet än de undervisar som tur är. Men det är anmärkningsvärt att Kenyons lära gör det möjligt att ens resonera på det här sättet. Guds välsignelse på. Nu ska vi lyssna på ett klipp då med John Haller med flera. Och de tar upp hur nära krig det är i norr och hur oerhört farligt läget är där nere i Mellanöstern just nu. Det är allvarligare kanske än vi tror. Håll till godo, Gud välsigna er. Amen.
Disaster that could face Israel if the war begins in the north, particularly given the sort of tenuous relationship between Israel and the United States right now, which the United States is probably Israel's biggest ally. We supply a lot of their weapons and ammunition stores. And it's just the relationship is deteriorating for any number of reasons, in my opinion. And that was manifested earlier this week at the UN Security Council, where the U.S., for I think only the second time in its history, did not veto an anti-Israel resolution. So when this war starts, the estimates are potentially tens of thousands of casualties on both sides of the Israel-Lebanon and Israel-Syria borders. So guys, I just want to kind of open the floor to discuss this. What do you think is going to happen? What are the things facing Israel, and how do you think it's going to go? And then, kind of build in there how you think it fits into Bible prophecy.
It's a lot there, John.
Yeah. and take a minute each to cover all the subjects. Okay. Britt, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say I think it's inevitable that we're going to see this conflict erupt into an all-out war, because you have over 60,000 residents in northern Israel have been evacuated since October 7th. That can't continue indefinitely. And based on what happened October 7th, the threat of Hezbollah, even without that element of surprise, is greater than what Hamas was. And I don't think that Israel has the mindset that they're going to continue to allow that type of threat to exist on their border. And just because we haven't seen that conflict erupt into an all-out war yet doesn't mean that it hasn't been really inevitable since October 7th. I mean, we look back at, say, World War II, that officially began with the invasion of Poland by Russia, Germany, and you had France and Great Britain declared war a couple of days later. And there was some minor conflict, just as we've seen. There's been well over 4,000 different engagements between Israel and Hezbollah since October 7th. But the bulk of the fighting between Great Britain, France, and Germany didn't take place till May, 8 months later. So there's a lot of logistics that take place behind the scenes. There's a lot of planning on both sides. And I think that it's inevitable that we're going to see this escalate, because, again, Israel cannot allow this threat to continue and to continue to grow and build if they do nothing. And so I think it's just a matter of time before we see one side or the other strike.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, you were just in Israel. What was the thinking there when you were in Israel about the potential for war in the north?
Well, I talked with a lot of different people, and I think what Britt says is really what I came away with. We met so many evacuees at the hotels we were in. One lady we met was in Tel Aviv. His whole family, her husband had been killed, but they're all evacuated from the north, in Galilee, Tel Aviv, even in Jerusalem. We met different evacuees, and the same sentiment came from every one of them. We can't go on like this much longer. They're living in hotels. They have little children. You can tell they're desperate to get back home. They know there's a battle that is being waged. The other thing, John, I think you and I had talked about a little bit earlier in the week, maybe even last week, was that on the Temple Mount, I was on the Temple Mount. I did a short video up there. It's like the second day of Ramadan, I think, when I was up there, and there's virtually nobody there. And we had several different drivers the whole time in Israel. The majority of them were Muslim. A couple of them were Israeli Jews, but they were all working like they did in years past. They're going back and forth between the Jewish sections, the Muslim sections, just like they always had been. But I really get the sense that what's happening in the West Bank, which I prefer to call Judea and Samaria and the area of the Mount Olives, is that the Muslims know Israel has the upper hand right now with Hamas. They're afraid to do much. But when you look at the north, Israel can't continue to live like that forever. And whether it be Iran that decides to pull the trigger, or it's Israel that decides, look, we're going to step up the whatever we need to do against Hamas, because these evacuees can't go back home until this problem is dealt with. And that is a huge problem. And, I'll refrain a little bit from what I told my wife last night, but I'm very blessed that we were able to go have a great time 2 weeks ago to Israel. But I'm looking at the future, and this problem with Hezbollah, to me, in the sense there, is very real. What are they going to do with all these evacuees? What are they going to do with the entire northern territory? If Hezbollah isn't dealt with, they can't go back home. They can't go back to living like they want to live. And you look at the biblical timeline of what is coming, We do know that things are going to escalate in the north. Is it going to be now, or will it be 5 years from now? But I tend to lean with what Britt is saying. Something's going to happen, and there still is pressure from the internal parts of the West Bank. And then, but I do think Israel's going to eliminate the Hamas problem as much as humanly possible. The Hezbollah, I think, is a huge problem.
Yeah. Well, when I talked to Avraham last week, he painted a picture. I listen. We know that God has this plan for Israel, so I don't want to discount that or ignore that. But I also am a realist, that I live in the real world, and I have to look at the things that are going on and the things that we're facing. So I'll just summarize what Avraham said, was that this is a very difficult situation. Whatever Israel has faced in Gaza, you could multiply it many times to show what they will do, what they will face in the north. Sarit Zahavi, who founded the Alma Research Center, and the video that JNS put up, the 7-minute video, it looks to be a joint project between JNS and Alma. And I've heard Sarit talk and do interviews a number of times, and what she said was this: every other home, or at least every third home in southern Lebanon, is associated with Hezbollah. It's owned by Hezbollah. It's a Hezbollah supporter. And whatever they found with regard to the tunnel situation in Gaza, they always assumed that the tunnel situation in southern Lebanon was worse. There's some belief that there are tunnels that go all the way from the Lebanon border to Beirut. And what is that, 30, 40 miles? And they're drilled through bedrock. They're much more difficult to deal with than the tunnels in Gaza. And when they started the war, they thought, what did they think? Hamas had 30,000 fighters. Now it's up to 40. They never really give a solid number. I think it's up to 40,000 now. So that Hezbollah has at least 50,000 regulars, and probably double that serve or have served in the Syrian war. And we haven't even talked about the Syrian part yet, and I want to be sure we talk about that, so don't let me forget. But Abraham said, I said, so what does this mean? He goes, right now, the people from the north have evacuated 60 to 80,000. They don't have schools for the kids. They don't have jobs. They're living in hotels. They don't know what the future is. Some of them are starting to say, we're never going back. And Sarit Zahavi says, we can't live like this. Something has to be done. And what Hezbollah has done is sort of created a artificial buffer zone inside Israel, as opposed to a buffer zone inside Lebanon. And the people are there. And I said, but what happens if the war starts, Avraham? And he said this: no child in Israel will go to school for at least a year, anywhere in Israel, all the way to Eilat. And that's a pretty sobering thought, because when those rockets start flying, and they have much more, they have probably 10 times the amount of rockets that Hamas had, and a lot of them are precision guided, it's going to be a very difficult situation. So what are the prophetic implications of that? What do you think? Anybody?
Well, I'll speak up. I think that what you're talking about, when we look at the situation that's going on now and say this can't continue with this displacement, and then you talk about what the implications are once this, I believe it's inevitable because of that displacement that this conflict takes place. What are the implications? Like you said, kids not going to school for a year. I don't think you can have a protracted conventional war that goes on, because you had the potential for loss of power and water in Israel from some of these rocket attacks. I think you're going to see Israel use absolute overwhelming force. And so I think the clear prophetic implications from my standpoint, I know not everybody believes this, but is Isaiah 17 and the destruction of Damascus. I think we're going to see an outright major war, all the force that Israel has in order to eliminate once and for all the immediate threat on its borders. Because if they don't do that, it is a clear existential threat to Israel. You can't continue to have a barrage of rocket attacks, not just from Hezbollah, but also from Yemen, from all over the place. There's Syria, Iraq. You can see rockets launched from all around Israel continuously, and to have this bombardment and to be living day to day, that cannot continue on, and you have a functional society. At some point, just your whole society and your economy breaks down, and then you have to wonder, are you a state? You may have people there, it may not be a conquered land, but at some point, if day-to-day life is unlivable, then what do you have? And so I think that's the existential threat to Israel that they are going to deal with overwhelming force, with everything they have at their disposal.
Yeah, I agree with Britt. I think that they're going to make an example of the North, whether that's carried out in Damascus or it's hitting places within Lebanon proper. But I think that they consider the North a much more serious threat than they ever did for Hamas, which may have been to their detriment. But now that all this has happened since October the 7th, I think they're hyper vigilant. I think they are looking at a worst case scenario with Hezbollah, and I think they're going to use overwhelming force. So what that looks like, it could be some type of weapon of mass destruction on Damascus, which triggers all the chemicals and biological stuff that's underneath the city and in their own tunnels and stuff that they've been storing there for decades. And at that point, Hezbollah may say, "Hey, we give up." That it may be over before that starts. But if not, then I think that they could continue that massive destruction against them as well. So, yeah, I don't see another like Gaza operation in the North. I think it's going to be very different. And I think once they are done cleaning up in Rafah, they'll be able to move all those Iron Dome batteries. They've already got Iron Dome batteries up in the Golan Heights, but they'll be able to move the bulk of them back up to the north. And then inside of the Iron Dome, they'll have David Sling, and then they'll have Arrow 3, and then they'll have Patriot batteries everywhere. So if it's any indication of the accuracy of the missiles that Hezbollah threw in 2006, they were at about a 23% accuracy range in terms of hitting populated areas. So most of their conventional missiles or short range missiles are going to be unguided. They do have they have about 5,000 guided missiles, whereas Hamas didn't have any, to my knowledge. So there is that threat there. But I think if Israel really does this quick and does this very hard, I think they can neutralize the threat in the North.
Well, when you say neutralize the threat, do you mean eliminate it or just sort of tamp it down?
Eliminate it.
Okay. And what do they do about the tunnel situation, Pete? How do they handle that? I mean, I don't think they've got control of that down in Gaza. I mean, the guy I interviewed, Avraham, he said, you clear an area, and 20 minutes later you go back and somebody's popping up out of the ground throwing RPGs at you. So you may control the surface, but you don't control the underneath part.
True. I look back to World War II, and when we decided to drop the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we didn't need to do that, but when we did that, that was enough for them to surrender that day, and they didn't want any more. So it may be that they make an example out of Damascus, because they know that at some point they're going to have to deal with the Syrian issue as well, and in this process, they may kill two birds with one stone, kind of, so to speak. But I don't know necessarily what to do with the tunnels itself. But here's where Hezbollah's their strengths are. is in their manpower. So you said 40,000, and I had read estimates somewhere between 30 and 50,000 fighters, active fighters. So somewhere in that neighborhood, their strength is in their infantry, and it's not in their infantry is not going to have the same advantage that Hamas had on October 7th because they've lost that element of surprise. So they're not going to just be able to stream across the borders. What their strength is going to be in drawing the Israelis and the IDF into Lebanon, where the Hezbollah guys are now fighting on their own turf, their own ragged landscape, and they're familiar with, and that's where their tunnels are. So I don't know that Israel obviously learned a lot of lessons here with Hamas, that their tunnel networks are far more extensive than they had previously believed, and far better equipped and wider. I mean, you could drive vehicles through there and everything. So they may be developing some type of technology now that can just neutralize that as well. I know we have bunker busting type missiles and things like that, but here's the advantage the IDF has in all this, that they don't have all these hostages that Hamas has. So right now they've been having to fight Hamas kind of with one hand tied behind their back because they didn't know where the hostages were. But with Hezbollah in the north, there isn't any. So they can just pound these things into tomorrow and not lose sleep over it because they're not killing their own citizens in the process.
And I would think you could probably flood them too, which is something they've talked about with Hamas. But for the reason you just stated, hostages, you don't want to flood out hostages. So there's a number of things that you could do when you have the willingness to do it. When you make that decision that we don't care about the implications diplomatically and within the media, that I think Israel has the upper hand. They just haven't gotten to that point yet where they're willing to do whatever it takes to achieve victory.
Yeah, neutron bombs would do it too. That would leave infrastructure in place, but it would suck all the oxygen out of it would kill everybody in the tunnels if they were to hit it strategically in the right places.
In case the people that are watching don't know, there's an article from the Begin Sadat Center about discussing the Samson option, which is the use of nuclear weapons. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes after this is over. But it's a very difficult situation to do. I mean, if you think public opinion has turned against Israel, now what happens if they drop a tactical nuke someplace? I mean, Tom, what do you think is going to happen in that situation?
I think Israel is already on the definite declining side of public opinion. And I also look at Iran and thinking, well, now's a great time for them to strike while anti-Semitism is so significantly high that, it's like they're in a win-win position in a sense. But when I look at the biblical implications for what's coming at the same time, I do think Israel has to do something. I believe, like Pete, that Hezbollah is going to be neutralized. I think the problem there with the tunnels is way bigger than Israel estimated pre-October 7, not just with Gaza, but they obviously underestimated Hamas. If they did that, how much have they underestimated Hezbollah also? So that's a huge factor. The other thing is when you look at Isaiah 17 and Damascus, we know Damascus gets leveled in a night. In the evening, there's trouble. In the morning, she's no more. But there's also, my interpretation of Isaiah 17 is that Israel takes some rather significant casualties in their northern territory. So as we see things develop, everything is going the way that we read about in the news as it works out biblically. The other thing to keep in mind when you enter into the Ezekiel 38 war, well, these people groups are non-existent. You don't read anything about the area of Hamas with Gaza. You don't read about Lebanon being involved. You don't read about those different threats with Ezekiel 38. So my guess is they are going to be eliminated at least to the point where they're going to be totally ineffective. So I think Israel's going to be doing something rather significant. They're going to have to, whether it's preemptive by them or Iran does something. But you also look at the nuclear threat that's coming from Iran. Israel has to act. They're already hated by much of the world. I mean, they're hated by churches, they're hated by universities. So it's like, how much more the anti-Semitism is going to be exposed if they go and do something rather huge in the northern territories. So I don't know. I don't see. And again, going back to the earlier point about the evacuees, how long can Israel go on like this? So something's going to have to be done, and I don't think it's going to be in the too distant future. I can't imagine this going on a year just like it is right now.
Tom, I got a text this morning from our friend Roddy, who lives in the old city. And he said that today was Ramadan, Friday of Ramadan, one of the weeks of Ramadan. And that things were I think there was 120,000 people at the Temple Mount today, and things were pretty peaceful. I think you and I talked earlier this week that maybe, at least right now, what Israel has done in Gaza has sent a message to people that, you better behave. Do you think there's any validity to that thinking?
Yeah, I do. But when you look at Iran, plus if you look at it this way, Hamas is an asset of Iran. Hezbollah is, the Houthis are, they're all assets of Iran. So Iran knows they've lost Hamas. So how much do they want to risk losing Hezbollah? I mean, they lose Hezbollah, Iran has a huge problem. So Iran has to, look at this rather strategically and work through that process. So, but yeah, I think that's why you don't have these uprisings at the current time in the West Bank or in a Mount of Olives area, the Temple Mount area, is because Israel is rather decisively dealing with the Hamas problem. And I do believe that it's just a matter of time, probably not a long time, before they come out victoriously, much to the chagrin of the world's thoughts towards Israel. But you start looking at the Hezbollah problem. Yeah, I don't think Iran wants to lose that asset, but at the same time, you strike while the iron's hot, and Israel can't. There's no way Israel cannot continue to live like they are with that threat from the north. They just can't. So I think that factors in Isaiah 17 in the not too distant future.
I think an interesting thing is that, we talk about Israel, the problems for Israel and people leaving the north. But it's also true that in the south of Lebanon, maybe double the amount of people who fled the north in Israel have fled the south of Lebanon. And that's the Lebanese, well, assuming that Lebanon still exists as a country, as an entity. Do you think, and I have some friends who have different ideas on Psalm 83. One of those theories would be that Psalm 83 sort of shows an alliance of countries that will be entered into sort of a peace agreement, a peace situation with Israel. Well, right now, some of those countries, some of those areas, which would include Tyre and Sidon, that's Hezbollah. And Gaza, of course, is Hamas. But if Israel defeats these people decisively, do you think the people that are left might say, hey, we need to go along with Israel? And that will sort of reinvigorate things that people were talking about just 10 days before, a week, 2 weeks before the October 7th invasion. Benjamin Netanyahu, who's at the UN, saying we're on the verge of a new Middle East. But that didn't quite turn out the way that I think he was thinking about at the time. But what do you think what would happen if Israel actually is successful here in eliminating the threat, as Pete put it?
Do you have anybody you want to answer that?
All of you, any or all.
I'll throw something real quick because I just talked for like 5 minutes. So I'll make this quick. But Israel eventually has to get to a place of some type of peace for Ezekiel 38 to be fulfilled. We know twice in Ezekiel 38, Israel's living in security Well, that could equate to the IDF, keeping them secure in that sense. When I was there last week, it was totally peaceful. It was great, just like it's always been. But the one of the verses in Ezekiel 38 says there'll be a peaceful people. And the word peaceful is the Hebrew word meaning tranquil. And Israel is nowhere near that place right now. So something has to take place where there is some type of tranquil state where Israel's guard is down. Will it be what you said, John? That's an interesting thing to talk about, because it could be just, I mean, what else are the people who are left after Israel decimates them? What are they going to do? I mean, you look at the Old Testament times, the people decided we better get along with Israel during the time of David. So you start looking at this, it makes a lot of sense what you just said, that those people will want to live in peace. So I'll stop there.
Okay. Pete, Britt, what do you guys think?
Well, I'll say from a Psalm 83 standpoint, again, just like Isaiah 17, there's a lot of debate over what that means. I believe those are prophetic in nature, pointing to this time period. If you read Psalm 83, verse 13, it's a prayer of, Lord, do these things to our enemies. And when you read Isaiah 17, verse 13, it's the Lord saying, I'm doing those very things to your enemies. So it's almost word for word, exact one verse over another. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, yes, this is most likely, this is the highest probability means by which Israel reaches that tranquil period that Tom mentioned in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And it probably is likely to lead to some sort of short-term peace that Israel's immediate enemies make with Israel.
Yeah, I think when you look at it, most nations that have committed a significant, overwhelming victory or a significant attack that is, utterly destructive in whatever their goals are, whether that's the United States or at the end of World War II, or if you look at other nations, I think there's a sense of guilt, collective guilt or national guilt, that you use so much force that you're willing to really be the lead champion in peace efforts, because now you're like, I've just done a bad thing, and it's common nature. It's common in human nature for us to want to feel like that. So I do feel like this attack on Hezbollah, this threat in the north, and presumably Damascus, will be so overwhelming that at the end of that, Israel will be in a position to say, okay, all right, we not a mea culpa, but hey, we are ready for peace now. We're ready to really get serious about peace. Now these threats are gone in the immediate area. And I think it does have a chilling effect on all these other groups that might have decided to rise up and now they're not. And that still leaves Iran, but Iran now is still, bound by the tyranny of distance, being as far away as they are. And that ultimately will feed one day into the Gog-Magog coalition. Yeah.
I want to ask you a little bit. I don't know if you guys had a chance to review this article. Let me pull it up here on the screen. An article by Yaakov Lapin in JNS on March 21st. Hamas attack as a weapon of mass distraction as Iran nuke program advances. Let me just summarize the article very quickly for everyone. And again, there'll be a link to it in the show notes. And what Lapin says is that Hamas did this attack, and they may have gone too quickly. They may have acted outside their authority from Iran, but that Iran, Israel's bogged down a little bit in some respects with Hamas in Gaza. It's still not finished. It's been months now, but everybody, I think, that was realistic knew it was going to take a long time to eradicate Hamas. That was the most deeply entrenched terror organization ever anybody's faced in history. That was going to take time, but that then we have sort of the low-level attacks coming from Hezbollah. I mean, my Red Alert app goes off all the time with regard to attacks from the north. I mean, there was a bunch this morning. Every morning, every evening, there's some. And there's been, I think, close to 400 Hezbollah fighters and commanders killed since October 7th, which is almost as many as they killed in the entire 6-week Second Lebanon War back in 2006. And we don't even know about it. It's just not talked about that much. So Lapine thinks that the low-level warfare going on with Hezbollah is a distraction to allow Iran to finish up its nuke program. And let's assume that they are doing that in the background. What are the implications for that? How does that relate to some of these prophetic passages? And how does Israel deal with that particular threat, assuming Iran makes advances and finishes up its some of its nuclear weapon program?
I feel like a lot of what Brits talked about over the, I don't know, since like 2017 with the evolution and exponential evolution in technology, that at a certain point, I mean, obviously, I think Israel, if you remember back to 2016 when Netanyahu's, I guess it was 2016 when he's in the United Nations and making the case against Iran, and they were only weeks away or months away. They've been saying that for a number of years, and it seems like they've been weeks or months away since the early 2000s. But I think at a certain point, technology is going to nullify the idea of a nuclear weapon making you a global threat or a global, serving as a global deterrent, because of the nature of artificial intelligence, the nature of swarm and drone technology, and all these things that can quickly disable nuclear systems. I don't know if Israel is kind of looking at it from that light, saying, okay, well, yeah, they are advancing in this, creating a nuclear bomb. I think North Korea has like 50 nuclear bombs. But when you stack them up against, say, Russia or China or the United States, I mean, it's really nothing in comparison to those. But even aside from the nuclear threat itself, there is systems and AI and other things that can be used as weapons that will disable that way ahead of time. So I don't know. Maybe Israel's got like an evolving mindset about this.
Yeah, I would say, from the implications of Iran and their involvement, I'd go back to what Tom was saying and build on that a little bit. But so Hezbollah is an asset to Iran to engage in a proxy war against Israel with and be able to have plausible deniability and say, well, that wasn't us that did that. That was Hezbollah. But they've put a lot of effort into equipping, training, funding, providing intelligence to building up this massive army in Hezbollah. I don't think they're going to stand by and watch that get destroyed. So there's going to be some sort of reaction from Iran in the event that Israel attacks. You also have to look from the standpoint, well, if they're sitting there and saying it's inevitable that Israel is going to attack Hezbollah, perhaps we should preemptively strike and have Hezbollah, because as you mentioned, the same issue with displaced people is going on in Lebanon as well. And Hezbollah, in addition to being a terrorist organization, is also a political organization. And they want to have public opinion in Lebanon in their favor. So there's pressure on them as well. And that's why I think this is inevitable. You can't have the current status quo go on indefinitely with these displaced people in northern Israel. And so sooner or later, this is going to come to a conflict. The question is, what happens as a result of that? And as part of that paper you sent, one of the things they mentioned was that Israel very well may use that conflict as a reason to attack the nuclear capabilities of Iran in tandem with a conflict with Hezbollah. And then again, what are the implications? What is Iran going to do? I don't think they're going to sit back and just let all of this happen. They may not even strike Israel directly, as we've seen with what's going on in the Red Sea. They could do something similar in the Persian Gulf. And again, global public opinion in their favor. Well, we're being attacked unjustly because we weren't involved in this. This was Hezbollah. But, we're going to shut down the Persian Gulf out of protest. and put pressure on the entire world in terms of access to oil, because oil prices would just double, triple, quadruple at that point. It's hard to say, but I think that there's no way that there's a conflict between Hezbollah and Israel without Iran having some sort of major counter offensive, whether that's through means of the Persian Gulf or a direct strike. And I think that there's no way this conflict isn't inevitable. I think that was set in motion on October 7th for the reasons we cited earlier.
Yeah, Iran's been pretty good at, we'll fight till the last drop of blood of the last dead Hamas individual. They don't usually put their people out front, although Israel takes out their commanders and leadership in Syria all the time. I want to show you one quote from this article at JNS. It says here, this is a security guy named Yaakov Nagel. It says, meanwhile, Russia recently set up military positions in southern Syria near Israel. While Nagel, that's a security expert from Israel, a retired guy, doubted that Moscow posed any current operational threat to Israel, he added that Jerusalem must be cautious about future potential Russian assistance to Iran's nuclear program, which could be given as repayment for the Iranian supply of unmanned aerial vehicles and missiles to Russia's war effort against Ukraine. Nagel said, I hope the Russians do not do this, but it can happen. We are talking about knowledge in the nuclear field. How do you think that fits into some of these, if you think it fits into some of these prophetic passages? Tom?
Yeah, I mean, well, we know from Ezekiel 38 that it's just a matter of time before Russia and this coalition that includes Iran and Turkey, they're going to invade from the north. And John, I think you and I speculated on this the other day. You look at technology and what could happen to Iran when we have this invasion from the north, the Ezekiel 38 invasion.
Right.
It appears there's a ground invasion, but also something coming from the air, and because you have horse and bucklers. What's that refer to? Do we take this passage literal? And then also when it says they're going to be coming upon them like a cloud, is that drone technology? When we start working this out, where's all of this going? When we start thinking about the technology and what is Israel doing about it? John, when I was in Israel, it was a couple of years ago. We went to the bullet factory. Did you ever go to the bullet factory?
No.
It's amazing. It's at a time it was designed. It was a kibbutz, a working kibbutz, and it was during the time when England said, the Brits said, "Hey, we're not going to give you any ammunition." Israel wasn't going to have it. So this is way back, 1940, whatever. You're not going to have any ammunition, and they had all this pressure from England. Well, what they did is they made their own ammunition in a kibbutz. They had dug out an entire underground area. They built what appeared to be a laundromat over it for the kibbutz. It worked on hydraulics. This thing was crazy, John. You need to visit it sometime because when Israel's supply of ammunition was cut off, they had to figure out something else that they could do. I look at that. It's worth visiting anybody who goes to Israel to check it out. But I look at that and you look at what's going on right now with pressure from the U.S., threats of not having weapons, threats of not having ammunition, the advancement of weapons, or what's going to go on with nuclear technology, or what both Britt and Pete were saying, as we look at technology in general. Will it be nuclear? Will it be something else? What is out there that's already been developed that we have no idea yet, that hasn't been publicized? And then you look at this article that this guy writes about that you just quoted, Yaakov Nagel. Is Russia a threat, or will they be a threat? We know they're going to be a threat. What is Israel doing to prepare for that ultimate threat? Are they not just telling us, just like their nuclear capabilities? They obviously don't make those public, right? But you start looking at this and go, okay, what are some of the underlying things that hasn't been publicized by Iran. You know, I mean, look what happened with October 7th. Hamas is able to pull all of that off, this surprise. So I look at the whole thing very interesting. We know Russia's going to be involved, and I do believe technology is going to be the technology is being advanced that we aren't even aware of yet in weapons that are going to be used in the very near upcoming battles.
So, Pete, let me ask you a question, and Britt, maybe you can weigh in on this too, because these are just sort of reports, things that I've seen today. I get these, hey, you need to invest in this type thing, this defense contractor. And one of the ones I got, and Britt, I think I've heard you talk about this, and I think Pete also, about, a project from the Defense Department to really develop things quickly. And part of that was on drones, but part of that was on hypersonic missiles. But then today I read a report that's like the U.S. is sort of dropping its hypersonic missile thing because it's not working. I mean, what do you guys know about that, or what's your input on that? Because I do think it relates to what's going on in Israel and Russia and Iran and every other theater of war that's developing around the world at the moment.
Well, I can't speak to the hypersonic issue. I've not read up on I know what the U.S. had attempted to do. It had some failures in the past. We know Russia's using them or has used them in Ukraine. And so Russia, I guess, is probably leading the world in that type of technology. But I think what you're referring to, being able to produce things very quickly, is that the molecular manufacturing, Britt, that you've talked about quite a bit.
Sure. Yeah, back in August, the Deputy Secretary of Defense came out and announced something called the Replicator Initiative, where they had an 18-month goal for the Department of Defense to be able to field sea-based, land-based, and air-based drones in the hundreds simultaneously in a conflict. And so as you see things moving forward, and as we've seen with Israel, Hamas, as we've seen with Russia, Ukraine, the battlefield is absolutely being transformed by drones. And right now, drones are in the very earliest stages of their development for what the capability will be. And so when you look at traditional defense contractors in the United States, where you had these 10, 15-year programs, and we're going to develop this multi-billion-dollar weapon system, we've seen what a failure that's been in those conflicts, and how quickly inexpensive drones can just eliminate some of those expensive weapon systems. So there's going to be, and there is a move toward investing in low-cost drones and drones as munitions, and really putting your emphasis in building the software and the AI, and then the manufacturing capability to drive those costs down and to be able to create those on the battlefield in the area of conflict. So that, for instance, imagine what we see going on in the Red Sea, and imagine if you had the ability to create a swarm of 1,000 drones controlled by AI, so it acted in a swarm much like a swarm of bees would, and they descend on an enemy, and then you can create in almost real time, in a matter of hours, another swarm to follow that up in case that first swarm is somehow defended against. And then these swarms would be controlled by AI and be learning on the battlefield. They learn about the defensive measures that were deployed against them, how to adapt against those, how to get around those defensive measures. And so this is what we're headed toward, that's really going to transform the battlefield. And in a matter of years, it's going to make, as Pete was mentioning, mutual assured destruction is going to become obsolete, because nuclear weapons, as we know them, are really conventional systems in a similar way. And all that keeps that going is really, I believe, the underwater nuclear capability and not knowing where those are located. But we're already seeing France started developing drones underwater for just a specific area. It's meant to go around particular ships, and they use a acoustic signature to listen for enemy vessels. And so imagine as these drones get smaller and that manufacturing capability comes along, you would be able to deploy these. And I believe you would need molecular manufacturing to drive the cost down low enough to do this, but you could deploy those all over the world in the depths of all the oceans. And it would be like flipping a light switch. You would be able to see everything that's in there. And then imagine deploying weapon systems that mimic a school of fish, except again, they're drones as munitions, as we're seeing on the battlefield. What would a nuclear sub, how would it combat a school of fish that can just swarm it and destroy it? And so
Britt,
that's where we're headed.
I think there's been some hope, though, that this laser, things like Iron Beam in Israel and some other laser systems would be able to take out the drone swarms. But I have an opinion on that. But what do you think? Do you think that the laser technology is going to develop to be able to take out all these drones?
Yeah, the common arguments I've heard against this is lasers and EMPs and having these directed energy weapons. The issues with that is, okay, what's your range? And so like on a laser, if you miss, what are you hitting on the other side that maybe is an asset to you somewhere else? Also, right now, maybe a laser works in the Red Sea when you've got 5 drones coming at your warship. What happens when there's 50,000? You have 50,000 lasers you can shoot at once.
Right.
As far as an EMP, again, there has to be a range on that. And so if you fire this, electromagnetic pulse, okay, well, you don't want it to go on forever because, again, it could take out some of your assets. So let's say you limit it to a mile. Well, as I talked about before, artificial intelligence is going to adapt to that. And it's going to go, hey, we're going to get hit 1 mile from here, stop short of 1 mile, and then fire a projectile toward that target that won't be incapacitated by the EMP. I mean, there's going to be, again, this lasers, I think, is more of the mindset of these conventional systems that aren't going to be adapted and evolving on a monthly, weekly basis the way drone swarms are evolving. And so they're going to be left behind. I don't think those are going to be adequate defenses.
Pete, what do you think? You're a military guy.
Well, I think what I've been speaking to is the shift in the mindset within the DoD into going into this mosaic warfare model to move away from the conventional systems where you have a standalone tank, a standalone piece of artillery, a standalone helicopter. You want everything synced together. So you basically have 3 components. You have a decision maker, and whether that's a person or that's an AI system. Then you have the sensors that are going to be arrayed throughout the battlefield. And I would even say the way that smart devices are going now, they could actually serve as sensors. So if you look at a city and then you have a drone flying overhead, and whether it's a human or it's some kind of AI system controlling the drone, it's going to be able to see everybody with smartphones, for instance, in their pockets. And it can quickly be able to pull the information from that phone and say, okay, yeah, this is civilian, or this guy is a high-ranking target, boom. And then it could direct the executor. So that executor could be an attack helicopter, it could be a drone, it could be some type of directed energy weapon shot from a satellite. I mean, who knows? But that's the shifting nature of warfare. And that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier with regard to, so if Iran gets let's say they cross the threshold and they are able to make a nuclear bomb, even if they could do that, they still are not going to be able, you still have the tyranny of distance of having to be able to launch that thing from 700 miles away and hit it somewhere in Israel that would affect what you want it to affect without destroying the Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. I mean, they may aim for Haifa, they may aim for Tel Aviv, but even still, I mean, Israel's so narrow. I mean, you're going to take out a lot of, I don't know. I just think that technology, let's say go back to 2016 or earlier when Netanyahu was speaking at the United Nations, his saber rattling to get the world to wake up to the threat of a nuclear armed Iran was legitimate at that time, but as that threat shifted, because now technology has moved so far past where a single conventional ICBM with a nuclear warhead on it, a nuclear payload, is not the greatest threat anymore. But I don't think that they're going to let Iran keep going in that direction. I think they're going to find a way to cripple that.
But can nuclear weapons be miniaturized to, be delivered by a drone? Is that technology available? I hope not, but I don't know.
Probably like a dirty bomb type scenario, right. But right now, Iran is providing Hezbollah their drones. They have a Abibel 2 and a Moharher. I don't know if I'm saying that right. But the Abibel 2 has got a range of 93 miles. So even if they tried to launch it from, they'd have to get pretty close to the border to get it into Israel, the center of Israel. Let's say it's some kind of a dirty bomb. And it can carry about up to 100 pounds, I believe.
Okay.
So I don't know.
So we said we were going to keep this to about an hour. So a couple things. Tom, I want you to address something. This comes up every time Ezekiel 38, 39 comes up. Is
red
that
heifer?
It had, we can go, we can get off on the red heifers too in a moment, but the Ezekiel 38 and 39 is only at the end of the millennium. What say you in response to that? I know what your response is, but go ahead.
Yeah, I don't see how people come to that conclusion. What they do is they jump to Revelation chapter 20 and they take that the Gog from Revelation chapter 20 and they conflate it with Ezekiel chapter 38. They're clearly not the same thing for various reasons. One of them is that the territories where the battle of Ezekiel 38 comes from are listed, and the territories of the battle of Gog from Revelation chapter 20 is also listed, and that's the entire globe. Revelation chapter 20. Ezekiel chapter 30 is localized. And also the way I look at this Gog is this spirit entity that is really in charge of this territory, as you have the Gog-Magog invasion, Gog being the one who is going to be the one leading the what I believe Russia in the Gog-Magog invasion. But it's a spirit entity is the way I look at it. But again, it's the territories. It's global in Revelation chapter 20. It is not global in Revelation chapter in Ezekiel chapter 38. And there's several other things that you can also make a clear distinction. I'll even throw this out there. I believe you can do the same thing. I better not. I'll open up a can of worms and we won't get out of this if I say the next thing.
Okay. There's one thing I want to address briefly. I'm going to address some of these issues in my update on Sunday. But even I'm not going to be, as Britt knows and Pete and Tom know, when you start addressing these issues, it's very easy to go down about 18 rabbit trails very quickly and eat up all of your time that aren't relevant. But I want to raise one issue because the U.S. has come out today, or within the last 24 hours, there's a suggestion that the U.S. would fund a peacekeeping force in Gaza to handle things there to get that stopped. Just give me your quick input on that. What do you think of that, and where is that headed, and how does all that fit into this thing? And I may just save my comments for my update on Sunday. You all have to listen to it then. But what do you think about this? The U.S. funding a peacekeeping force for Gaza. I think it has big implications, but go ahead.
Who's first?
Well, I'll start. I think it would be a mistake. I don't think strategically Israel's going to go down that path. As I stated at the beginning, I think that they're facing an existential threat, and they're going to eliminate these threats on their immediate borders. And, the United States can protest against that all that they want, but I don't think Israel has a choice. And so that's what I think is going to happen.
Yeah, I think that the U.S. May want to do this, but the actuality of it, with it actually being carried out, I don't think whatever take place. For one, it's directly contrasting or contradistinct from what Netanyahu has said. He doesn't want that. He's already laid out his plan for post Gaza operations. But secondly, I think that if that were to be the case, I think that the U.S. and whoever else is involved in this would find themselves embroiled in all sorts of other issues that all of a sudden become way more problematic for them, and that becomes something that just gets put to the curb, so to speak. So just like Gaza in Hurricane Katrina kind of situation, we start meddling with that, I think we're going to start having our own existential problems that are going to draw our attention back to ourselves rather than messing with Israel.
Well, maybe we just outsource it to the Haitian army or something like that.
Tom,
what do you think about this? I'll just give mine briefly at the end. Okay. And I'll ask one of you guys to close in prayer, and we'll wrap it up.
I think it would be a really bad idea, and I don't see it happening. But I will say this: I don't know if it was you, John, or you, Pete, that I mentioned this to, but when I was in Israel, I was sitting at one of my meals, and nobody's at my table with me for a few minutes. I'm talking with this guy next to me, next table over. He's an Israeli Jew, and within seconds we found out that we had completely opposing opinions. And he loves Biden. And he said, the only way this is going to be resolved, I said, what happens the day after? He said, the UN has to come into Gaza and run it. The UN has to be the peacekeeper. This is disturbing to me.
Excuse me, just a second. I have to, okay, I had to do my own face palm there.
Yeah,
go ahead.
But this is a problem that Israel's had throughout their history, biblical history, secular history. They've looked to other nations or other leadership to bring them their security. And what's going to happen the day after is very concerning. And we do know that there's some kind of covenant that's coming, Daniel chapter 9, but that's still in the future. But you look at Gaza, something's going to happen. And I don't know if Israel's going to handle it rightly.
Well, so my thinking is, and I will flesh it out more on Sunday because I know I promised these guys to cut them loose. But I continue to look at Daniel chapter 9 and this covenant, make firm, confirm, gavar, or whatever the word is, which is sort of like with force, with strengthening. And I cannot discount, I thought this since 2016, when they had Resolution 2334. And if you want to know all about it, listen on Sunday. Resolution 2334, which was the first anti-Israel resolution that the U.S. did not veto at the Security Council. And Samantha Power was the UN ambassador there. And I will play part of her TV interview from 2002, where she made some very troubling things. And now it sounds like, and she's still around. She's, I don't know, USAID director or something. And I'm just wondering if this Daniel thing is not so much this great thing where they have a signing ceremony like they did with Oslo on the White House lawn in 1993, but it is something that they're just, the force thing is they're going to shove it down Israel's throat. You're going to do this. And I can't discount that right now. So I'm just going to, I will talk about it on Sunday as I think it's a possibility.
Can I just throw something on there, John?
Sure.
Remember the last time?
Well, as long as it's
happened,
good and you agree with me, then you can do it. Otherwise, no.
The last time that happened in, what was it, December of 2015? What happened?
2016.
Trump won. Trump
had already won, though. That was when Obama was a lame duck.
Yeah, okay, that's true. That's true.
But listen, Pete, we have an election in November, and Biden, I call him O'Biden, is in office until January. So if Trump wins in November, it's going to be chaos. Just trust me. It's the legal stuff. It's insane. I'm so troubled with what's going on in America. But so we're going to have the same scenario, right? We have the Biden administration in charge until January 20th. And it didn't stop Obama in 2016. Why would it stop him 8 years later from doing something very anti-Israel at the UN to kind of shove this down Israel's throat? That's my concern. And, we do provide weapons to them. I agree with people like Caroline Glick that says this, the U.S. or Israel needs to get away from relying on the U.S. for anything. And I think that has prophetic implications too. But, well, anyway, guys, this went by way too fast. And in about, I can't remember if we decided yet on April 9th or 10th, we're going to do a technology prophecy roundtable. Tom and I and Britt and Scott Townsend and Patrick Wood is going to join us. And that'll probably be a couple hours. And that's going to be April 9th or 10th. Just watch for notice on that. And I'm going to ask Britt to close us in a word of prayer. Listen, I know that all this ends very well for us, but that doesn't mean there's not going to be some rough spots between here and there. And I thank all of you for listening. There will be articles and links in the show notes, along with some of the links to people that are participating today where you can find them. And Britt, why don't you just close us up in a word of prayer?
Sure. Lord, we just thank you for bringing us together today, and this technology, the ability for people in 4 different locations to speak with so many people all around the world. And we just hope that this has glorified you and turned people to your word. And we've talked about a lot of things that have to do with Bible prophecy. And we just hope that everybody out there knows that the essence of that prophecy is to point to Jesus Christ. And so if there's anybody out there who's lost, who doesn't know Jesus, we pray that you will use this to open up their heart so that they
I världen fann jag för min tröst, ty jag var sjunken ner så djupt att Herrens nåderöst blott var mig till förtret. Tack Guds lamm, Guds dyra lamm, Guds lamm på Golgata. Jag nu älskar dig, för jag är frälst och fri, ty där du lev för mig. På korsets trä i smälek häng min Jesus på mig såg. En blick som syndens band har sprängt, till honom står min håg. Tack Guds lamm, Guds dyra lamm, Guds lamm på Golgata. Jag nu älskar dig, för jag är frälst och fri, ty där du lev för mig. När jag fick se det kval han led, blott för att frälsa mig, till honom som där ensam stred, jag bad förbarma dig. Tack Guds lamm, Guds dyra lamm, Guds lamm på Golgata. Jag nu älskar dig, för jag är frälst och fri, ty där du lev för mig. Du är min håg, min själs begär, att vandra med min Gud i kärlek, tjäna honom här tills han mig sänder bud. Tack Guds lamm, Guds dyra lamm, Guds lamm på Golgata. Jag nu älskar dig, för frälst och fri, ty där